Welcome to today's episode of The Square, a curious conversation with J.M. Rizzi. Thanks for being here. I really appreciate it.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.
So you have a lot of different hats. We're going to get into that in a second. But as an artist, when was it that things just clicked and you knew you wouldn't be happy doing anything else?
That's a good question. I think for me, it probably started very early on as just the thing that I did.
Were you just always like doodling and drawing?
I was always doodling. There was a great comic book store in my neighborhood.
Yep.
And so it was more just being really enamored by, different illustrators, and then copying them like a lot of, young artists do.
Yeah.
And then when I, it's always somebody else sees it, and then that's how you know that you're doing something.
There's some validation there.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So the validation came from being able to take a very small panel and scale it up on a piece of paper.
Sure.
Some printer paper, sitting in front of the TV, or sitting at the kitchen table and just drawing. And then the validation came from that. And then it was just the thing that I did. I was the artist in my family. I was the artist in my school. I was the artist in my neighborhood.
Yeah.
And then, it wasn't until probably, later into high school that I realized that you can even go to school and study art. I didn't even know that it existed. Exactly. I had no idea. Most of the my peers around me were either not going to college or going away to just, kind of party.
Yeah.
And none of that appealed to me. And then I was fortunate enough to meet somebody who was going to an art school, the School of Visual Arts in New York, in Manhattan. And then once that door opened, I thought, I can do this.
Yeah.
I can at least commit myself to something, because at that age, all people are really asking for you is to commit to something.
Yeah.
Like, so what do you want to do? What do you want to be? Just commit
to
something. And so that door opened, and I saw that you could actually study art.
Yeah.
So then that's when I was like, this is what I'm going to do.
Was there ever anything that was like second in the running?
Not seriously.
Yeah.
No, I mean, no.
It was always this for you.
I think this is what I'm going to do. And whatever happens, happens,
So when you get to school and you kind of discover this abstract expressionism, was there something about that just like reached out and grabbed you versus, something that isn't abstract, more figure or something else?
Yeah, I remember the exact day. I was in an art history class, and we were looking at slides, and a Franz Klein drawing, an ink drawing on telephone paper came up.
Huh.
And it just reminded me of so much of the stuff myself and my friends were doing, where we would just have these, homemade markers filled with black ink and just drawing on everything. And now, going back to that kind of validation, like, you can do that. I'm seeing it, in a slideshow in a classroom. That was just a big click. And then I wanted to learn more about who were these artists and what were they doing and why were they doing it. And so that was kind of the first hook. I remember writing down Franz Klein and let's find out who this, it was still kind of pre-internet. So it was then just going to bookstores, and it was, I was also into jazz at that time. So, jazz and art were similar because, you could listen to a Miles Davis track, and then you can hear, John Coltrane on a track and be like, oh, okay, let me now dive down the John Coltrane rabbit hole and find the different people that he collaborated with. And so I was of that mind frame of either bookstores or record shops at that point in my life, or coffee shops.
Lots of coffee.
Lots of coffee.
What is the role that music plays in both how you create, but also your inspiration?
Yeah, so when I'm painting or making art, music is always on. And the way that I sometimes compose a painting, or when I'm doing a drawing, there is a musical flow to it. Whether that, and when I'm adding in colors, there's like, maybe the darker tones are the bass lines, and maybe where there's pops of color might be like a horn pop here or a riff here. So in my mind, that's kind of how I plot it out.
Yeah.
I plot the artwork out musically, so it's got to flow, to it.
You mentioned that one of those milestones in your journey as an artist was kind of discovering abstract expressionism in school. Tell me a little bit about what abstract expressionism is, and then who are the artists or what are the works that kind of stood out to you?
Sure. So it fit perfectly at this time in my life, because abstract expressionism was kind of the first, and I'm sure scholars will scold me.
Yeah.
But one of the first, big art movements that American artists had. Prior to that, everything was coming out of Europe, and there was artists in New York. They were trying to break away from that as much as they could. So artists that were involved with that were Willem de Kooning, Jackson Pollock, Mark Rothko, Franz Klein, who was one of my favorites, Robert Motherwell, and they were very scholarly about it. But they were trying to break away from the European movements,
which was mostly like real life
or surrealism, cubism, because this was 1940s. And so what they were trying to do is they were trying to create an experience that existed on the canvas, right? So this is an experience that happened a moment in time. And it happened at a time, at a great kind of cultural renaissance for America, because 1940s, early 50s, also jazz is Blue Note is blowing up. And you have the beat writers like Jack Kerouac, Allen Ginsberg, William Burroughs. All of that whole package was really influential to me in my late teens, early 20s. It was a time in American history that I just loved. Yeah. I was reading all the beat writers, I was listening to jazz, and I was just consumed with these abstract expressionist painters. And the cool thing about living in New York is that Allen Ginsberg you could see, I'd see him in walking around. You can go walk past Mark Rothko's old studio. There was just all sorts of, like, that history was still around.
It was accessible. Right
yeah,
there.
It felt like this was real, and being there and making artwork, you were an extension of that.
So I've got this visual of you in a neighborhood in Brooklyn, and I'm sure completely wrong, but I've got this idea of kind of like a hole-in-the-wall comic book shop, and you go in there. Was there an artist that you were always drawn to, or a comic or a character? Yeah,
well, actually, this was in a different neighborhood. So we had moved from Brooklyn to Staten Island, which is another borough of New York, and there was this comic book store called Jim Hanley's Universe, which eventually they moved to Manhattan, and they went on to have this really, big comic book store. But their start was in my neighborhood, right next to a train station.
Yeah.
And, it was a bunch of comic book heads that wanted to have a shop.
That's awesome.
And there was video games in the back, and, kids would get kicked out for cursing. And for some reason you could smoke in there as a kid, because that's what you do. You play video games.
Don't curse,
and you
but come on in and bring your
yeah, just don't curse. So you can smoke cigarettes and play video games.
That's awesome.
And that was just like, it was aptly named Jim Hanley's Universe. It was like another universe. And, the other people who worked there were illustrators. So I just kind of enjoyed watching them. And they, in true comic book, world, they were snobs. I was just an annoying kid who wanted to see how they drew, X, Y, and Z.
Yeah.
And then I can kind of figure out what they were doing and bother them a little bit. And Yeah, and that was kind of it.
Was it just the aesthetic of the comic book style, or was there something about the story of comics? The thing I love about comic books is the sky's, and even beyond the sky's, literally the limit when it comes to the story and how deep you can go.
You know, it depends. I think I was more into the visual aesthetics of some of the comic books because I never really got too deep. And I've had friends over the years that are deep into the comic book world, and I would not put myself there. I just liked the visual aesthetics of it and wanted to copy them and learn. I kind of looked at them as like tutorials or, you know, things to learn from.
Well, you can definitely see that in a lot of your artwork. I'm curious, one of the accolades that you're known for is street art. When did that kind of come into play?
So that kind of came into play in like the late 1990s. And that stemmed from, you know, just to rewind a little bit, in high school, I was also very much, you know, after the comic book phase came the graffiti phase because things, after they shut down the subway riders, everything came above ground.
Right.
So that was just everywhere.
Yeah.
And, I mean, that just, it hit at a perfect time because I was already artistic, but it was at an age where you're looking to be mischievous as well and make a name for yourself in a way that's not, you know, too crazy.
Yeah.
You know? So, you know, I was into that for a while, and that's another thing that kind of led me to go to art school because a lot of really great graffiti writers from the city went to this particular school. It's like you could follow the tags.
all the
way to the school. And then so, you know, I studied there for 4 years and then came out of this really amazing bubble where everybody is important. And then you're out and it's New York City and nobody
cares,
knows who you are or cares about this really creative portfolio that you've made. So, you know, it was like, it was a total wake up call. My first job out was third shift at a print shop. So working, you know, midnight to 8, doing nothing creative. And that kind of went on for a long time. And then I started noticing, you know, certain street artists were posting or putting things up. And so because I had an understanding of how to do that, what times to do that, when the best time to go out and put your stuff up, I was like, I want to be a part of that dialogue because so many of the galleries were closed off to people, any other artists. I mean, the struggling artist in New York City is very real. So I thought,
and this is before social media.
This is when blogs started coming about. So I just had all this artwork and was doing all this stuff anyway. And I thought, let me start putting it up on the street because really what you want to do as an artist is to be a part of a particular dialogue, whatever that may be. You know, I want to add what I do to this.
So when was the point where you felt, you know, we talked about verification early on, where you kind of looked back and you felt, okay, I've now moved from maybe struggling artist to artist. Like I've got the verification where you never feel like you've arrived, but you feel like you're not in that struggling artist category anymore.
Right. Well, that's a good point. It's like how long is an artist emerging?
Yeah, exactly. You know? It's like in the Grammys, it's like the new artist category, but they've been around for 6 or 7 years, or even 20 years in some cases.
Right. They just decided to recognize them.
Exactly.
I guess that happened when I started to get more commercial projects. And it started with a hotel in New York called the Pod Hotel. They had asked me to create a painting on canvas. So they'd built this beautiful lobby, all glass, and then there was a backyard that was still a construction site. So they wanted to have something temporary so that when people came into the lobby, they didn't look out into this.
To the back.
Into a dumpster with trash and like, you know, an excavator back there. So I came up with this idea of creating this this canvas kind of piece that would cover it, And it was at a time when I told myself, any project that I get, I'm going to treat it like it's at the MoMA.
Yeah.
I'm going to put everything into it. So
Yeah.
the budget was really low. Practically, for the amount of hours, I spent maybe like 3 days,
Yeah.
just drinking coffee and painting this masterpiece. And they loved it, and it became part of the aesthetic. So then from there, they wanted more.
So did that end up going away when the construction was done, or did they keep it?
They kept it somewhere.
Okay.
I don't know where it is. But I then went on to do a permanent piece in their lobby, painting murals on every floor. And then they went on to build 4 more hotels, and I did the artwork for all of them.
Oh, that's incredible.
So it kind of just stemmed from that, like, hey, we just need a temporary thing.
And you made the most of it.
And I was just like, I am going to rock this. This is going to be like my Guernica,
That's awesome.
And from that, I was able to then say, well, that first one we did was more of a favor.
Yeah.
And then once I became part of the brand, then I was able to, just do that.
So then you left New York. You've been living in Dallas for how long?
10 years?
10 years in
Yeah.
Dallas. So tell me a little bit about the difference in those two art scenes, especially for somebody that's an artist like you.
Yeah. Well, the main difference is here you can have space and a lot of it. And I think what most artists need is just some space and the time to make work, It's kind of a cliche, but time and space is what most artists really need. And you can get that here. And the art scene here, or the art world, whatever you want to call it, is a lot more open. When I first started going around and introducing myself to people, they were receptive.
Yeah.
Whereas I think in New York, they're not. You
Is
really
it a
have to.
competition thing, or just a critical mass of people?
I think it's just a critical mass of people, and you kind of have to be ushered in by other people, which is just part of the networking game. And that's another thing that, like, putting up work, publicly kind of circumvented that whole thing.
Yeah.
I can just go out and put my work up, and then somebody can take a photo of it, and then it appears on a blog, and then that travels around the world. And it's like you kind of circumvented that whole thing, which most artists tend to not like to do anyway, to put themselves out there,
Right.
to network. It's a difficult thing. You have to have a lot of confidence. And whenever you're making art, sometimes like you may think like I've made something great, but I don't know.
Yeah.
I think it's great, but and in a place like New York or any other big city, there is like what I call the invisible audience in your head, where you are maybe stopping yourself or criticizing yourself based on what you think, other people may say. And then moving here, it helped me to realize that none of those things exist.
Yeah.
That audience does not exist. You can just make whatever you want, and that's it. Because really all I ever really wanted to do was just to sustain a life where I can make art. And that's really it, be a working artist.
So we're talking about the external art scene, art world here in Dallas.
Yeah.
But you still have to create the art. Is the creation of the art different for you here than in New York?
Yeah, much different, because I'm not necessarily cultivating the work to a particular audience. I'm just making what I want to make.
Is it more true for you here?
It is, yeah.
Really?
Most of my breakthroughs came when I moved here.
Huh. Your art has such a unique energy and style to it. It's obvious to hear that you got some of your inspiration from a comic book store
Sure.
that you can smoke in. But there's such a unique energy to it, and what do you attribute that to?
I think that's a good question. I think that there are those influences in there, but I feel like the work that I make just perpetuates itself. Meaning,
Is it an exploration for you as you create each piece of art?
Oh, absolutely. And sometimes the exploration is, doing a drawing with a particular material that maybe I haven't used before, or maybe it's creating a large, ink on paper or ink on canvas, and then going in and kind of mining the compositions that I like from there, and then pulling those out and kind of bringing the viewer into the drawing itself by, blowing it up. And that was one of the breakthroughs that I had down here in Texas, which I really couldn't do in New York, is I could make 6 foot by 8 foot paintings that were compositions of a larger drawing. So I can just pull the viewer in. And one of the art movements that I really clung to when I was studying was the abstract expressionist painters. And, they made these massive paintings in black and white, like Franz Klein or Robert Motherwell. And I was able to kind of find my own voice within that genre and bridge the gap between two inspirations in my life. So the abstract expressionist painters and then, graffiti or street art, because I'm using the materials from that world, but tying it back to, a previous art movement.
Is there, kind of blowing things up and diving in and bringing the viewer to a small piece is a really big thing for you.
Yeah.
Do you know why?
I think I like the boldness of it. I studied design. I studied graphic design, and I can't shake that. Like my work is composed and balanced, and no matter how hard I try, it ends up that way.
Which is crazy, because I think you're absolutely right. But when you look at your work, there's so many different colors and lines and whatnot, but you still incorporate a balance there that's really incredible.
Yeah, I can't shake it.
What about your day-to-day? So any artist, even in an exploration, is going to get worn down day after day. What do you do to keep the energy for that adventure and that exploration?
I go back to drawing when I feel, that kind of, I don't want to say disillusion, but, sometimes when you're just making art every day, I go back to two things. I go back to drawing and then just the sense of gratitude. Like, I get to do this.
Yeah.
I've gotten to this point where I could wake up, go to the studio at 9 and work from 9 to 5 and then leave. I mean, this is everything that I have been working for in my adult life. So I just, I don't lose sight of where I've come from and where I am, and try to maintain that sense of gratitude. And understanding that some days it's not going to come, and that's okay. Sometimes just being in the studio, even if you're not necessarily working, being there is okay. It's okay to just be in the studio some days.
Your art has been on buildings, it's been on handbags, it's been on shoes, it's been on buses. There's the application and the mediums have been really diverse. Is there something you haven't done yet that you really want to do?
I mean, I'd like to do taller buildings. I mean, for me, I just love making really large scale paintings. So I think that's the goal, is to just continue to make big paintings. Is there a project, or I get this is kind of like picking your favorite child, right?
But are there some projects or paintings that kind of stand out as milestones for you? I won't say favorites. I'll say milestones.
Right. That's a good question. Like, if I were to look at backwards and say, okay, at this point, where would I drop pins?
Yeah.
And say that this changed here and this changed here. So definitely the Pod Hotel was a shift, because now I was not only making work, but I was representing myself, which is a big deal when you're going into, meetings and standing up for the work that you've made.
There's a balance there. There's a dichotomy there, because you have this artist sense that wants to be verified, but you're presenting yourself as something very confident. Right.
In the back of your mind, you're like, this is crazy. Are they gonna let me do this?
Yeah.
All right. let's go for it.
Yeah.
I think the next milestone was when I did my first exhibition in Hong Kong. That's when I was able to do the collaborations with Emilio Pucci and Parenzo Schuler and Jimmy Chu, and we did the double-decker bus that we wrapped, that I designed and we wrapped, and it went around the city for a month. That was the milestone, the big one, because I'm in Hong Kong. I've got a crew of late teens, early 20-year-old kids with their Supreme knockoffs, and doing interviews all day long. That was when I was like, I just walked around. I was there for maybe 10 days, doing these different.
Just enough time to get over the jet lag before you had to turn around and come back.
Yeah. Exactly. With just a huge smile on my face. I'd have to stop sometimes and sit on a curb and just be like, I can't believe that I'm here.
Yeah.
So I guess, to go back to the other question, I really feel like that gratitude is key to keeping the
energy.
Yeah. I never really ever lose sight of that.
Is there, when you were talking about the collaborations, was there any hesitation in doing that? With an artist, you have a visual voice, and yours is very unique.
Yeah.
And there's potentially some trepidation about joining that voice with someone else's voice.
Right.
Was that ever something that gave you any hesitancy or pause, or was it something where you were really looking forward to that collaboration?
I was really looking forward to the collaboration. I think the only thing that gave me pause was trusting the people on the other side, because I didn't know them. They reached out to me, asked me if I would want to do something in Hong Kong. We had multiple conversations. It's kind of it's a slippery slope because artists do get taken advantage of.
Sure.
So that was really my main concern, as to whether or not this is real.
Yeah.
And it wasn't until I got on the plane and landed and I was picked up from the airport that I realized, okay, this is real.
Yep.
But that was really the only trepidation that I had. I don't want to, get bamboozled.
When people hear the term corporate art, I think there's probably, at least traditionally, an image of maybe more hotel art that comes in, and not like the good hotel art.
Right.
But something just to hang on a wall.
Sure.
And then you have a corporate art residency program, and you just don't think of somebody that has an artist of your caliber and whatnot. But that's something you've kind of dived, just like with the Hotel Lobby Project, into. Why is that important, and why do you think a corporate art residency program is important?
Well, the one that we did here, I just loved the idea of documenting the studio, and then having these large format photographs showing kind of inside the artist's space, because that's a view that you don't often get to see.
Yeah.
For me, it's the studio is kind of a sacred place.
Sure.
And so allowing viewers to see what that looks like, and then also to have those photos documented as a moment in time, was important to me as well. So I just loved the idea. So yeah, that was kind of the impetus behind me saying yes.
I remember coming down the stairs in the middle of the Corgan building, and right at the end of the stairs across the hall was one of your large photographs. And I deal a lot with photography and film on a day in, day out basis, and I was struck by how sharp and real it was.
Right.
And it was literally like a window into another room.
Yeah.
And a room that you wouldn't necessarily expect. And Corgan does a lot of things that are more artistically and design minded than a regular office building. But even so, it felt refreshing. It felt like, as somebody that's trying to create, it was encouraging that there's this painting or this photograph of somebody else in their creation space,
and they're doing it.
Right. Yeah. Is there for artists that are looking to move from that idea of a starving artist to somebody that is an artist?
Right.
I do think that there's some advantages to having corporate sponsorships and whatnot, but what are the pros and cons of that?
Well, the pros are, if you partner up with a corporation that sees the value in the artwork, and doesn't try to stifle the vision of what the artist wants to make. And what I mean by that is to say, okay, we recognize the value of this particular artist's work. We want them in this space. We think it will, uplift the environment for the people who are here every day. And I think that's important. That's kind of part of the reason why I do public work, is so that, people can just experience it.
Yeah.
So to me, that is the pros.
I think through the collaborations you were talking about with these artists that, on the other side of the world, you don't know if it's real. You don't know how that's going to play out, and it requires a certain amount of trust.
Right.
I would imagine partnering with like a corporate residency program requires that same kind of amount of trust.
Sure.
You don't know if it's real. You don't necessarily know what kind of influence they're going to want or whatnot. What is some advice for embarking on that journey?
I guess, whenever you're going to partner with any type of corporation, is to, one, make sure that you understand your value, and you don't lessen that.
You don't shortsheet it. Yeah.
Or shortchange yourself.
Yeah.
Just to get, I know a lot of people starting out will do that just to have it, on their CV, and that's totally fine, because ultimately you can do whatever you want.
Yeah.
But my advice would be to understand what your value is, and understand that if you're working for a multi-billion dollar corporation, they have the money to pay an artist.
Yeah.
So ask for it.
Yeah.
And then stay true to whatever your style of work is. So I tend to never put, corporate logos. I'm glad to work with a client. I will gladly discuss color palettes, because I enjoy that challenge.
Yeah.
And it's almost like if I was a chef and you say, okay, we want to cook this meal, but we'd like a couple of these particular ingredients.
Sure.
Am I going to say, no?
Yeah.
You eat what I cook.
You might.
I
but
might.
You might miss out on an opportunity too.
But yeah, I just feel like that there's a collaboration here, and it goes back to that kind of sense of gratitude. Okay, if this company or this corporation wants to collaborate with me, I'm open to make it work. But where I draw the line is, corporate logos. If they want something that I just don't do.
Yeah.
I'm primarily an abstract painter. Sometimes I put representational work in there.
That's part of staying true to your vision.
Yeah, I'm not going to start doing charcoal portraits of, employees, because I don't do that. And there's other people that would do it better than I would do that, so I don't want to take that away from them.
What is, kind of circling back to your art and your visual voice, what do you think is the greatest value or purpose that your art can accomplish?
That's a good question. I think primarily just the pure expression of making art.
Is there something specific you want people to feel, or maybe that they feel when they see your work? Yeah,
that's a good question, because a lot of times I'll make a painting or I'll make a mural, and people will come up to me and they'll see things in it that I never intended, and the majority of the time I don't even see what they're talking about. They'll say, I see how you've got, this is a face up here and it's looking down, and there's another person that's looking up and you can see their legs are over here, and I'm like, I don't know what you're talking about. I don't see that at all. But in their mind, it created a narrative that they can relate to. Yeah. And I like that. I like there not necessarily being this forced narrative of this is what it is.
This is the only thing that you're supposed to get out of this painting.
Right. It's a bowl of fruit.
Yeah.
And you can make any other, assumptions about it. But with creating abstract work, I like that people can find their own narratives in it, and they can take it or leave it. Yeah. They don't have to read a whole essay to appreciate it. They could just take it or leave it. And the public work I like to do because I feel like it's almost in some ways striking out against so much of the uniformity that we see around us. I mean, they cover buildings with advertisements, right? And Yeah, I love the Apple ads. They're great.
Yeah.
It's, the dog dressed up with the leather jacket, and it's a whole side of a building. That's great. But so much of it is advertising driven, and how that subconsciously works in our head. So to just do a piece of art that's colorful and vibrant just kind of breaks that up a little bit.
Yeah, not there to sell you anything.
No, it's just there. Here's a piece of public art.
Yeah.
I just think it's reassuring in a community. And if there are artists out there in whatever ilk that may be, could look at it and be like, oh, you can do that. Because that's really what any artist, regardless of what their form of expression is just to have that validation that you can do that.
Yeah. With so many things going digital and being virtual, is there a desire to see any of your art translated into digital or virtual, or maybe like NFTs or anything in that realm?
Yeah, I'm currently working on a couple of collaborations for NFTs, but I'm doing it in a way that feels natural and not this big gold rush where everybody feels they have to now jump into this. Yeah. I want it to feel like, I guess the word organic maybe doesn't fit when we're discussing digital, but just to feel natural. So, a lot of the work that I make is digital when I'm working with projects in China where I'm sending over vectorized artwork, and then they're recreating it or covering buildings with it. So I have so much digital artwork already. It's a good way for me to just share that. It's like another platform to share that work.
Out of curiosity, for that process, are you creating physically and then digitizing, or are you creating digitally?
It's a little bit of both. So I'll do drawings, and then I can, digitize them, vectorize them, and then begin to play with different colors, with different transparencies. And now with motion graphics, I can have things moving around them.
That's awesome. I know this is going to be kind of a touchy question, but is there such a thing as bad art?
Yes.
Okay. So it's not all subjective.
Well, I think bad art is anything that's done that doesn't have any soul to it. And you can see artwork, and you went back to earlier when you were saying bad hotel art.
Yeah.
There's no let me put it this way. I like that people make art regardless of what they make. Yeah. I think if you're making it, that's great. But if you're just going online, let's say, there's so many like YouTube fads of like, poured paintings, and there are masters of it, and then there are people that just do it because
YouTube video.
And there's nothing really behind it. That to me feels like bad art, and I feel like it's almost a little bit of an insult to the people who are out there really kind of trying to master a particular craft or get something that's inside of them out.
Yeah.
Do
you think that that's tied to art making people feel something, whether it's upset or happy or sad or?
Sometimes, but sometimes, especially now, people just want likes. And so they're emulating things. And there's nothing wrong with emulating other artists. I think that every artist starts off doing that. And I tell people, if there's somebody that you admire, copy their work.
Yeah.
Because eventually it'll become your own. Eventually you'll break away from that and you'll start to create your own style. But I guess it's really the why. Why are you making this? And I understand that some things people are inspired by and they want to make it, but that doesn't mean that they're making good artwork.
I can't imagine a better place to leave it than thinking about why you do it.
Right.
I am curious, is there anything coming up that you're working on that you want to talk about?
Let me think. What have I got coming up? Yeah, there's a couple of projects in the pipeline right now. I don't necessarily want to jinx them.
Fair enough.
But I will be creating a large outdoor installation along the University Trail.
Cool.
And that should kick off hopefully in September, if not October.
Awesome.
And that'll be a really cool project because it's part of the University Trail underneath the Greenville Avenue Bridge.
Okay.
And the goal is to kind of create a sort of a destination. So I'll be creating some exterior murals there, and then they're going to have a master gardener come out and do some gardening. There's going to be a bee pollination thing there, and then there's going to be some benches to sit. So that I think will be really cool.
Kind of a multi-sensory experience.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Well, thank you so much for being here, James. I really appreciate
welcome.
you talking with us. And thank you for joining us. If you want to learn more about J.M. Rizzi, make sure to check the description below. We'll have links to his website and some of his artwork. And make sure you check out the next episode of The Square.